Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we discuss all things cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka UberBear, and I'm joined by my other co-host.
Hi, it's me, Magic.
And then we have our other host,
Stu.
Yep.
Howdy, everyone.
And we've got a pretty cool topic since we've got three people that just have a passion, well, specifically two, myself and May, that love building thematic cubes.
And I love playing them.
And he loves playing them. We're going to talk about how we do that. But before we do that, we're going to do a few announcements. One, I just got back from Ireland.
Very nice.
Took my family for a full, just the experience. Not the bouncing around Europe saying that we went to every airport in the continent, but rather
I went to the pubs.
I want to see the pubs, the culture. We went to Galway, we went to Howth, we went to Malahide. I mean, it was at the Cliffs of Moher. Oh my gosh, got whiskey, didn't go to the Guinness factory, went to the Guinness pub.
I know, but you needed to go to Guinness to try and get my sponsorship.
I talked to about a guy who said he knows a guy who knows a guy.
Where's the consideration for the podcast? Anyway, we'll talk about that.
And then I talked to a couple people. I talked about our podcast at the St. Patrick's Cathedral.
Okay.
No one cared.
Let's track those Irish downloads.
I really want to see our Irish, for all of our wonderful Irish listeners, I really, really, really want to tell you, absolutely amazing country.
Nice.
Truly, truly did not want to leave, but I ran out of money. But that's enough of just a wonderful vacation. Oh, one more. Very important for you art lovers out there. I got to see a Caravaggio, a Rembrandt, a Picasso, a Monet, and a Da Vinci, all in the same place.
Really?
For free. But yeah, it was amazing. You want to talk about, like, my wife's like, Anthony, we got to go. I'm like, no. I'm staring at this Caravaggio. It was the one with Judas. Oh my God. I stared at that thing for 35 minutes straight. But that's enough. Moving on. Just had to tell you about this wonderful, wonderful trip that we had. Let's do the thing that we always do here at UberCube, and we're going to have our beverage of choice. May, what are you having this evening?
I'm being a little boring this time. Normally I prefer my little cocktails, but this time I just have a Quirk hard seltzer peach apricot whip. I like it. It's kind of tasty.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Stu,
what do you have?
Well, this was my contribution to the evening today for Anthony and I. So I suppose I'll introduce this for the both of us. We are drinking a Bombshell Beer Company Dirty Secret Coconut Stout. This is a favorite.
Oh, that sounds good.
It's a favorite of mine. It's outstanding.
And before we crack that out, I've also brought some Busker, which is an Irish whiskey that I got, and it is sherry cask, and we've got that in the background too, and it is glorious.
For after the recording,
and I was saving. Well, no, we're 100% having it, but it'll get better.
Well, the rest of the
there'll be a certain point when you notice May's doing all the carrying here. You'll know what's going on. But
let's go. My back.
Let's crack them open and have a good time. Let's go. All right. Thematic cube design.
So tell us, Anthony and May, because again, me going back to being the enjoyer, the theme cube enjoyer, I mean all cube enjoyer, but you guys are kind of the theme cube aficionados, the gurus, right? So let's hear it. How do you build a thematic cube? What is the approach that you guys take? May, let's start with you. You've got one of maybe the world's most famous cube in the Fae Cube, right? Let's just put it out there. It's maybe the world's most famous cube, outside of the vintage cube. But start us from the beginning, right? What was your process for it? How did you decide on cards, the size, all that kind of stuff? Where did you start?
Sure. I will start with the basics that it started off as kind of just a bunch of cards that I happened to have from sets that I happen to like. And when I was going through my collection, I was like, man, I really just want a place so that way I could have, like, all these miscellaneous fairy tale-esque cards. And I kind of took that overall thematic idea and started working it up into the Fae Cube. And it's pretty straightforward because it is pretty straightforward in that degree. But when it comes to actually designing and going outside the mold, that's when things started. I was able to really start playing around with the boundaries of those themes. And one of the things that really separates the Fae Cube from, say, the other Eldraine cubes or the Lorwyn cubes or whatever, is that I've kind of taken the time to look for these cards that are, I would dare to say, kind of meta in a literary sense, where it's like fact or fiction, censor, and things like that, where they are very literal interpretations of writings, fairy tales, etc., and more of the external storytelling pieces of them, rather than just the direct one-for-one, this is Little Red Riding Hood.
You would say Grim Tales adjacent,
Grim Tales,
basically,
yeah.
right? Within the universe.
Brothers Grimm.
Yes, Brothers Grimm.
That kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So what we're going to do to help the audience to develop this idea, we got the overall shell, right? Like May says, poop, pops in my head, got an idea, going to build a Lorwyn adjacent Brothers Grimm universe, right? But how do you make this into a repeatable process? And you know, stepping aside from the cloning concept we did, I'm not talking about copying the Fae Cube or copying Anthony's Horror Cube or Artifact Cube, Uberbears, pardon. But what kind of process and how would you break it down? And we're going to include this in the show notes. Like, what would be the steps? Like, if I had a checklist and I'm running through a checklist and I haven't spent a dime, I just want to kind of sit in my own headspace and ponder, right? Brainstorming. Envision what the cube would like.
Maybe?
What would you like? In her case, she said, right, you wanted fairy tale centric. That was your...
Right.
That's kind of that was the light bulb that went off if someone were doing this. But maybe in my case, my light bulb was, well, could I do a cube that celebrated the females of the magic multiverse, which is like, I'm driving in a car one day and it hit me like, I'm like, oh God, I have an idea. And that's kind of where this starts, right? Yeah. And then now you've materialized this idea. What was in a very structured manner, before you started doing it, what were the steps you followed through? Like, what was the process if you wanted to emulate the concept?
So instead of replicating my approach for the Fae Cube, I'm actually going to talk a bit about some of the other ideas for cubes that I have been brewing around in my mind and how I would go through the steps of, actually building it. And a lot of it has to do with overlapping philosophies with top-down set design that you can hear from, like, the Drive to Work podcast and whatever. And it's about taking an idea and finding either lore adjacent or mechanical adjacent things and then kind of working them in and figuring out if there is enough things to support what you're trying to create, but also trying to think of the best way to explain this. You're trying to add depth to your concept. So, for example, I have been thinking a lot about, say, an auctioneering cube, where the entire point of the cube is kind of like all the merchant, currency, treasure, whatnot cards. Anything that has to do with, like, jobs, currency, trading, some of these mini game cards like Goblin Game, etc., to kind of warp the way that we play Magic in this environment to be more, treasure or resource reliant, so that you're playing a little bit more like an economy game rather than by using Magic as an engine and using that flavor. You're gonna get
a kick out of this because this is where you and our spirit animals. I've been designing in my head a Monopoly cube where I'm going to do lands matters. I'm going to do peasants and nobles and currency and some form of community chest and taxes and railroads using some of the vehicles. And how do I represent the game pieces, the dogs? I'm going to use like Ishimaru or something adjacent to it.
Right.
It's how you take an idea and you're almost like, what's the word I'm looking for? You materialize it or you try to do something that's adjacent to it, but it's like a writer-reader type of exchange where you have a vision. Maybe I look at Ishimaru and I go, well, that's it's from Kamigawa and it's a legendary dog and whatever. And maybe I don't see it as the Monopoly game piece. But then you now tell me, hey, that represents the dog in the said Monopoly game. And now I've got the vision. Does that make sense? And it does take a little bit of storytelling to make the players understand the elements.
My brain, I will say, goes to, if you've got a card like that, now I want to build some kind of angle to draft with that card that is going to represent not white players, but the kind of player that really dives first to grab that dog when the game of Monopoly comes out, right? Because some people just love playing with the dog. Some people love playing with the boot. I was always an iron. Remember the little kitchen iron? I was that. But now I want to use that white dog. I want to represent the dog grabbers in the Monopoly game, right? So that seems like it would be a cool angle.
I guess the point of this tangent is to make what May's saying, where she's doing stuff and she's using word like Grimm's fairy tales adjacent, where we have to take magic cards from the suite of the 25,000, 30,000 cards and then try to find something that aligns with the way that her brain is writing the story, right? And maybe you as the drafter don't see this initially, but if you allow yourself to, and that's where we're going to, as we move through these notes, we're going to go into how to immerse your players into the experience. And then I will go so far as to say, like, using the Fae Cube, your other cards bring the story to you. There's only so far. There's no way I could play your Fae Cube and go, this is just goblins. They're just goblins. Because you definitely have story elements, whether or not you're looking for it or not, that you'll trip all over. There's no way out of it, right?
Especially if you've got some imagination and you're sitting across the table from someone who's playing, like, you've got goblins against rogues or against, some of the creature types that are in that cube. Like, how cool is it that you can kind of build a narrative as you go along and play?
Yeah, your narrative is not hard to find.
And that was one of my key goals with the Fae Cube, is that I wanted it to not just be representative of the fairy tale stories of old, but also kind of building our own stories by having things like Didn't Say Please. That one's my pod's favorite from the cube, just because they're always built to those fun moments of, I see you're trying to do thing, but you didn't say please.
And you actually did a really good job recently on our with our good friends from Lucky Paper Radio, talking about how, what was it, you were building the primer. Yeah. Primer. When you're doing primer design to further build the story, and I saw a lot of people follow suit post that episode. I saw all the chatter about it, right? Because people realize that you not only made a book, but you made a book cover during that episode, right? And people that's how people buy the book. That's why they pick it up off the shelf. And yes, and your cube design concept is very story element driven. Why not have a shiny cover to make the reader walk by and go, ooh, right? And that's what I felt like you covered during that episode. And it was a great way of supplementing this thematic design, top level world building, is to package it also, right? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Tends to go hand in hand of how you're introducing the cube with what the cube is, and a part of that is roping your thematic ideas into a workable design space in a way that is engaging for your players, but also intricate enough for you as the curator. So let me take an extreme example of, say, I wanted to make a cube of ladies looking left.
Yeah.
And the entire cube is just all of the ladies looking left. And that is just the entire shtick of the cube. It would be a fun thematic gimmick. It would be interesting, and the way that you could play around. There's a card restriction, but it's very strict art idea of, yes, I get it. This is the theme of the cube. This is what it is. So you just go through, pull up the Oracle tag or whatever, and then just look up all the things under the tag, ladies looking left, and then just be like, all right, I'm going to shove it all in. But that's not what makes a good cube.
Well, you get a mirror,
that's just the surface,
and then you can just have a lot more card pool.
Exactly. But my point is that when you just take that surface level of, ladies looking left, and then adding an additional element to it, saying, oh, well, I kind of want to see how many planeswalkers that are in this category I can fit in.
Right.
Building up into those play styles or whatever that represents that archetype of, they're all ladies looking left.
Sometimes you will find limitations or walls doing that, right? Like, not every idea comes to fruition, even though it sparks it. Like, a good example in this, and we'll go through the process a little bit more, when I talked about that monopoly concept, and I originally said, well, I want nobles and peasants, and I was thinking about, like, feudalism or some concept around that idea, right? I started looking at the nobles, and the noble cards are very sporadic on their power level. There's no consistency. It'd be really hard to make those work. It's not that I couldn't, but I wanted to do something like a Daddy Warbucks concept or whatever, and but they were they're all over the damn place as far as the type of cards that are a noble.
I would imagine in the power level as well.
Yeah.
So even from a flavor perspective, like you can't just throw a Leovold into
That's
a
exactly
thematic
what I
cube.
mean.
I would imagine like something like that is
it
kind
started
of a
getting
really obvious choice, but then you look at Leovold and think, yeah, I don't know if I can.
It started getting
throw
weird
that
because
in.
I was kind of looking at peasants and serfs and cards like that and seeing what kind of feudalism I could do and then have it kind of monopoly adjacent. But then I started realizing the card pool was really all over the place, scattershot. It'd be really difficult to balance. It's going to be a hard one to bring to life, which kind of brings us past that brainstorming vision part, right? Like sometimes you might hit a wall. Sometimes you can bring your story to life, but maybe you don't have to trap yourself so much. Don't put such tight reins on yourself as Ladies Looking Left that you make it so restrictive. And I made the joke about the mirror, but sometimes you can find ways to bend the idea to you, right? Like my horror genre cube, and we're going to talk about this shortly, but one of the things I recently did was upgraded my lands because I want to present it for CubeCon. Well, some of my lands, my actual lands were in that cube were ones I had custom made with horror on it, but horror art on it. But because they don't allow proxies, I actually have to have real sanctioned cards. Now I've kind of tried to find cards or places where you wouldn't want to take a walk, a place where you wouldn't want to go swimming. And I asked my buddy that, Chris Samich, who's on the show, and I'm showing him a picture of, I think it was Yavimaya Coast that I picked out with like these shrines and runes on it. He goes, that's not very scary. I go, okay, dude, would you go down to your skibbies and jump in this water? Absolutely not. Okay, it's scary. Good enough, right? That's the concept I'm meeting. You make your own rules. That means your ceilings and floors, your boundaries. It's your world, right, May? You make your storytelling elements. Sometimes we get a little stretchy. Sometimes we stretch a little bit much, right? But we try to keep the rules and restrictions within tolerance. Another thing to kind of move through the process, if I were going to build this thing, would be like the size of the cube, right? 360, 540. That's kind of part of this concept. Where do you start? Because otherwise your brain will just keep designing a Fae Cube until you've got 1,500 cards. You have to bring it into something that's tight and playable. And then part of your process, I'm making assumptions, was definitely archetypes, right? And you're watching for power outliers. And you've told us before in your recent episode or your previous episodes, you like doing pillars or benchmarks, thresholds. These cards represent the dragon faction. This represents the strongest fairy in that faction within that spectrum of range you've allowed. You have literally built in like these really cool like
standard bearers.
Yeah, they're standard bearers.
Standard bearers.
They're literally that's exactly what it is. That's a good point. You've made pillars or standard bearers. That's good. I like that. Thanks. And then you've chosen like how do you want to manage your lands in that case? Or you use your lands as a restrictive build. We talked about that before. You want the players to earn the mana in so many words. It's part of your curation. And players, as you're thematically building, that's up to you. How do you want to do the mana? Do you want to make it so that they just have an open bank account, blank check of mana? Or do you want to do like May did and make it restrictive? Or do you want to follow my prescription where I'm giving you shocks and fetches and I'm emulating a high power level, but in a thematic faction-based type environment with vampires, werewolves, or in this case, the Femme Fatale? I'm giving you all the greatest females in Magic's history, but I'm making your mana base powerful.
I feel like that is something that requires a lot of thinking as well, because I'll go back, man, you definitely mentioned that you wanted to be a little more restrictive. I'm pretty sure you said on a few occasions that you're not really a huge fan of just people being able to put together 5-color good stuff. I don't know if that's an opinion that's changed or if I'm just totally off base with that, but I seem to remember you saying that you weren't a fan of just dumping just a huge amount of fixing ability onto the cube just because you wanted to sort of push the players to pick a lane. I don't know if that's something that do you still feel like that?
Well, I mean, this isn't exactly the episode to be talking about my opinions on 5-color good stuff. And
it's 100% now.
It's always the episode to talk about.
It's always a nuanced conversation that's usually revolved around. Usually the 5-color good stuff deck is only existing because aggro's not strong enough or because your fixing's too good.
Sure.
Yeah, that's fair.
And sometimes that's just what the design of the cube is, and I think that's fine. But when it isn't an intentional thing, like I think I've mentioned it before, like I had somebody actually draft a 5-color dragon deck, and I don't think that's doable anymore. Not because I intentionally try to gut it, but because the goals of the cube has kind of changed, the card pool has changed, etc. And because of those changes, it no longer really supports that thing that somebody else came up with.
Yeah.
And the reality is that my environment is slow. The reason why people are able to build in 3 colors is because it's slow enough to support it.
Yeah, so that's
But
a
anyways,
thematic.
aside from that,
Yeah, that's a thematic design aspect. Yours was about the tempo or the speed ratio of the cube and how you wanted the games to develop. And again, referencing Lucky Paper Radio, which did a great job with Sam Black. They talked about long games and short games, big and small games. It falls within that concept. Using their points of reference, and they talked about the Fae Cube very much represents big games. They're long, creature heavy. You got a lot going on a battlefield, snap decisions, audibles on the battlefield, and I just think that's a interesting game design aspect, and I like how they coined all those terms with Sam Black. I thought a great job. If I'm designing a cube, continuing with the process kind of breaking down, I personally use Signpost, and one of the ones I use to reference in, say, the Femme Cube, that there was a aggro package and also, say, a pseudo aristocrats package, is I use Judith the Scourge Diva, and for 1 colorless and Rakdos, you get a legendary creature, Human Shaman, 2/2. Other creatures you control get +1/+0. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Judith the Scourge Diva deals 1 damage to any target. She, in that environment, at the time, this is before they made a Blood Artist that was a female, represented that you could get some payoffs and an aggro package. I wanted to have Signpost embedded within that environment so that my female-centric universe I was making didn't have just game pieces that had no point. I also wanted to signal archetypes. So it's part of thematic game design, is finding pieces and games that are game pieces within your theme that tells the drafters or signals that you can do this thing, right? That's just my opinion. I don't want, even if it's not a 5-color good stuff, I don't want a lump of cards that just represents nothing for players to draft from. I want things that signal you can do control mechanisms, you can do aggro mechanisms, etc., or aristocrats in this case, etc. So I think it's important when I'm doing a thematic build is to put in, and they don't have to be in your gold section, right? Just pieces that say, hey, I've got an idea here. If you grab this, you may be able to build upon it. What are your thoughts on that, May, as a thematic designer? Signpost, rather.
So I'm actually going to piggyback off of you into a more, I guess, mechanical to flavor interpretation of that, of saying, when your card pool is big enough, as opposed to, say, Ladies Looking Left, which is the extremely niche extreme that I just kind of pulled out of a hat. When you take a concept like the Fae Cube or the Femme Cube, it's easy to have a lot of selections. That way there's a lot of options for how you're going to throw it together. But let's say, for example, you have your feudalism, or say, let's make it into a noble cube, right?
Right.
Suddenly, aristocrats as an archetype is now representative of a type of nobility.
Yes.
Or you could add sort of the kings and knights and etc. from,
now you're
say,
getting into my chess
into,
cube
this
that I'm
noble
also
package.
equally designing simultaneously. I have got a problem. Chess cube's already been
But my point
theory-crafted.
here is that you could take it as a very literal, this is an aristocrats package, because aristocrats as a theme represents this form of nobility, as opposed to saying have knights from Eldraine and then like Kenrith, etc. And then having that as saying, this is the representative of the nobility of Eldraine's white package.
Yes.
I don't have to explain, this knights, paladins, kings, whatever, for this package is representative of this kind of monarchy, noble, whatever.
Yes.
Because
I want to
it's
represent
taking a
the
mechanical
unwashed
aspect
masses.
and making it literal.
So
It translates that mechanic into flavor.
So the theme idea. So we've kind of went through the process. Will be in the show notes, by the way. It's not in a step 1, step 2 process. So you're not going to find that here. But what I've got is like elements that you would use if you were trying to solve the equation and build you a thematic cube. So we kind of been touching upon Ladies Looking Left and these concepts of feudalism or maybe monopoly or some kind of monetary cube. But theme ideas, they're limitless, right? But you can do some of the ways you can do it is like in my case, the Femme Fatale, it's art based. It's very specific, not just female, but it's also the art too. I make choices. It needs to be clean and respectful. There's a lot involved in that idea. And then, or you can do set based, but I'm not talking about a set based cube, but like Kamigawa, or you want to represent Japanese culture or some kind of concept like that. And you can build around that, and you don't have to stay compressed within that. You don't have to just build from Kamigawa blocks.
I think even
far-reaching ideas.
Yeah, going all the way back, mate, to what you said about I had a bunch of cards and I liked them. Like sometimes that's all you need as a starting point is, and you don't need the 180 if you're going to build a 180 or a full 360. Even if you've just got enough cards to provide yourself some signposts, right?
Yes.
Provide yourself some guidance, some direction. Like, hey, here's a handful of mechanics and, a handful of creature types, or just a few things that are going to start giving you some direction.
Enough to give us story elements to make you, I'm the reader, and I'm reading the story that May is telling. When I'm looking through her cube, like I said, I would see a couple of goblins, and if I wanted to go close-minded, I could say this is a goblin cube. But as you start going through, you'll see all the other elements and castles and knights and wolves, and it doesn't take a rocket doctor to figure out what she's trying to tell me. Other theme ideas we talked about would be like factional based, or you could build a cube that's based on combos, or maybe 180 that's a size restriction, or maybe do a space or graveyard, or Stu joked about a cowboy set, right? And granted, Wizards hasn't made a cowboy set. That's not to say, though, you as the visionary couldn't find card elements that are so close, it would be a struggle. But using tools like Scryfall and maybe some alternate art that you have made yourself, you could make this thing become realized, right? It's the only restriction is you and your imagination, and your players are willing to accept the story elements that you're trying to project within. We talked about this before, May. The one, and not to hark on it too much, but Scryfall is an amazing resource if you were at a loss as to thematic story pieces, right? And you can do by color, you can do by mana value. And here's the one you wanted to talk about, is by lore pieces. There are lore elements within Scryfall. You can look up. You familiar with that yourself?
Right. So say, for example, if I wanted to look up anything that mentions Lorwyn or a specific character from Lorwyn, like, it's not Conifer.
He's a pine tree?
It was the tree.
Conifer the pine tree.
Yeah.
Deciduous is his brother. You can slap me now.
Point is that if I wanted to look up a specific character from Lorwyn, then I could just type it in, anything that references that character. I could pull it up. It'll give me the exact card pool that I have to work with, and I could introduce it that way. But that doesn't mean that I can or should always put those cards in. It just means that I have those as options. And sometimes, depending on what you're trying to fill and what you're trying to do, say, for example, I'm going to go ahead and pull the Extreme out again with the Ladies Looking Left theme and being like, all right, I want Chandra in here. Then I'll look up anything that references or shows Chandra and then be like, bam, that one has Chandra looking to the left, even though it has nothing to do with her.
Right. And then the other thing, too, is even though you found the card that aligns with your thematic concept, well, it has to be playable. And then it needs to also fall within your ceiling and floor of power restriction. Like, what are you looking for? You talked about the Fae Cube. You want the games to be more long-term, more battlefield decisions. You don't want a card in there like Chandra Defiant in there because she's looking left and she's just wrecking everybody. No one can keep up with it because her ultimate kills the Fae Cube, right? So you got to be mindful of that. So theme versus power balancing is part of the equation. It's never that simple. It's more of laying out the palette, right? That's what you do. You got the thought, you brainstorm through it, you worked your way through the idea, you thought about the goal you wanted to accomplish, you found a card pool. Doesn't mean you're putting them into said cube, you just found the palette of colors you wish to paint with. And now you start kind of cherry picking the ones that meet your not only story element requirements, but your power level, your restrictions, whatever. That's part of the process of designing a thematic cube. And that does get meticulous. It's not something you just you don't just go on a Saturday morning and finish by noon, right? This is sometimes thematic cubes. If you're really trying to follow a story and you're trying to be a writer here in so many words, because you want your players to pick up on what you're dropping without having to tell them every time, right?
And I think actually that leads well into the next sort of section, is about this whole paper, rock, scissors design approach that has existed in Magic for as long as I can remember, right?
Yeah.
The aggro versus control versus mid-range versus combo, etc., etc. You've got this triumvirate of sort of global archetypes that exist that are certainly not always represented, but there's certainly that consideration there with how you can operate within, you know, color pies and themes and different archetypes to ensure that there's that balance. I don't know if that's something that I would always consider necessary, because maybe you're not always going to have combo in your cube, right? But there has to be consideration to ensure that there's balance throughout the cube for all of those different
It's kind of the stick building, so now you've got more framework to your thematic design. Again, the Fae Cube wouldn't work if it were just a bunch of cards that had the pictures on it. They need to also do something that it aligns with not only your pillars, your ceilings, your floors, your speed, your tempo, big game, small game, all these things, right? There's a lot of elements there, and it makes it seem that could we use the word daunting a lot. I use it too much, but that could make it a difficult entry point. I wouldn't overthink it as a new curator if I wanted to build a thematic cube. It's not always going to, as we talked about many times, it's not going to come out the gate the best thing in the world, but you will tune it. It'll become a well-oiled machine over time. Thematic cubes are difficult because a lot of times you don't have something you can copy or emulate. Like it's not like the MTGO, right? You want to do Ladies Looking Left. Good luck finding a lot of copies of that idea, or a Monopoly cube that we just built together. I think Christian and I even did, just for lulz, on one particular episode, and I was just messing around, like Vikings versus, I think I said like Vikings versus seagulls or some nonsense. But I was just kidding about the card elements that would fall within that if I were forcing
the seagulls are winning every time, right? Those Vikings on the beaches are just going to get pooped on.
But we were just trying to talk about, like, sometimes it's just as easy as just start talking it out with a buddy or something like that, or a friend, and bouncing off. Like May and I could probably bounce off and build a cube just chatting. We can go nuts.
Right.
I'm pretty sure our Monopoly cube and the monetary cube idea she had, if we just sat here and talked long enough, we could probably come up with some kind of amalgamation.
No, we clearly just have to combine Monopoly and Splendor, and then
boom, best game ever. Yes.
You're welcome.
So that kind of falls into that theory crafting aspect, right? And theory crafting falls, I generally speaking, it kind of falls within brainstorming too. A lot of these terms will kind of cross lines. If I was doing a Venn diagram of design, a lot of these terms I'm using, a lot of the lines will blend. You'll see them cross one another. But theory crafting would be more of, I'm ready to start taking this brainstorming idea, the talking it out, and start putting it to paper, is the way I think about that. Like, and so this case, I kind of talked about like how I came across the Femme Fatale cube and what methodologies I used, how I talked it out to find cards. And I used that paper, rock, scissors concept, and I found female cards, or in this case, dragons or some cats, or the flavor text even represented or told me that this weird looking slime was somehow another labeled as identified as female in this case, right? And I was able to then go, that story element fits, but then how does it contextualize to the cube environment and the goals of the cube that I have as a designer? Where would I put that within that paper, rock, scissors, and what, archetypes does that support? And then that's how it kind of, I guess, makes whether or not it's going to enter into the environment. May, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it just leads back to, it depends on what your design goals are and how big your card pool is, what your restrictions are, and a lot of those can be overly daunting when you're trying to just lay out everything all at once, when sometimes it's just a matter of getting your idea on paper, seeing if you have enough options to do it, and then taking that approach of, all right, with the cards that I have, what is the absolute floor that I'm looking for? What's the ceiling I'm looking for? What are some of the archetypes that happen to overlay, again, with like the aristocrats and say a noble cube, of being like, oh, this is a perfect fit thematically, mechanically, etc. And ultimately it comes from bringing back your painting metaphor, that your cube is the canvas, your card pool, your available card pool is the paints that you have access to. But at the end of the day, what paints you put on the canvas is up to your hand.
So I kind of want to tie these two ideas together, and this is going to be talking. It's going to be referencing an idea that I've since cut from my horror cube. But my horror cube actually has a self-mill theme built within it, and Hogak's actually going in there by tomorrow. So
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm putting it in tonight. But self-mill is a concept. So win cons were going to be the Jace, I guess the Mysteries one. Whenever you checked,
Wilder of Mysteries.
Wilder Mysteries, and it was Lab Maniac. But later down the road, Thassa's Oracle came out. And I will say that Thassa's Oracle is no longer in that cube environment, but because it was too strong. But for a short period, I put it in there, and I'm going to have in the show notes an example, and I don't know if you can see this, May, but Thassa's Oracle, even though, while it's creepy, and I could even argue maybe that's Cthulhu-esque, and maybe we can go into some Lovecraftian concepts.
It's got a Medusa kind of look about
but
it.
It's also the first one, the original art was a little too sweet and a little too happy and staring at a pearl. And for me, as my thematic design, and I have loosened the reins a little bit this, where I wanted this world to be horrific. I told you since you don't want to go for a dip. If you look at my 2 cards I put in here, I made one image that I got myself, and then the other image, and they'll be in the show notes. One's a really scary Thassa's Oracle. Same text, nothing changed about it, but she's not looking at a pearl anymore. She's got fangs. And that's where you don't want to go swimming in those waters of that environment that I've made, right? You no longer want to go to Yavimaya Coast and stick your fingers in the water, right? Because you might not come out with hands and fingers and toes. That's kind of how I'm envisioning the environment. And I am loosening and widening, so it's not just Innistrad anymore. It's not just you're in the villages and dealing with the Thraben, right? I want to go... Well, Innistrad's a lot bigger than that. It's a continent in my mind. As a thematic design, I'm making a world. And I'm making an island, or I'm going to make a continent, right? And this continent's horrible. But it has mountains and rivers, and it's got swamps and horrible places. And none of them are wonderful. But that's how I'm going to do it. But at the same time, I'm going to have coast. So Yavimaya Coast with these scary-looking rune-like water fixtures you'll see in my art tomorrow when we play it at the con we're going to. But if you take that as your thematic concept and your players can follow that vision, they go, yeah. I don't want to stick my fingers, my toes in there because Thassa's Oracle is in that water, right? And it's not a good thing. Well, that's kind of what I wanted to explain to the people listening. It's using proxies and other cards to help represent your idea is sometimes a way to get the ladies looking left to work, right? Because you'll run out of them eventually. So maybe you can bend the rules yourself too.
Get a custom card, like artist altar or something like that.
I'm not a huge fan of it personally, but I can see where if you really, really, really wanted to die hard into a concept, you wanted the Fae Cube to go hardcore more than you are as a person, right? You could start making custom cards and things that really represented the pieces that the ties that bind, the links you wanted to see that maybe Wizards hasn't printed yet. It is an option for a thematic cube builder. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm absolutely an advocate of if you have cards that fit a particular niche that you need to fill, just modify the card, customize it,
Sharpie,
make altars of it, proxy it. There are a lot of different options to shoehorn Magic the Gathering's kind of core mechanics or cards, etc., and then working it so that way it can visually or thematically fit together into your concept. A great example is that for a long time, I've really wanted Thought Scour in my Fae Cube. And the problem with Thought Scour is that at the time it just showed like a zombie getting his like head drilled in, etc. And that's
got a Fae on
not
it now.
Exactly thematic for a Fae Cube.
Yeah.
And the answer was I should have just created my own custom version of it.
Yeah.
But thankfully, I was paying attention to one of Wizards' release, and sure enough, they actually introduced a special version borderless art of it that actually introduces fairy stuff.
Yeah.
Not every card's going to be that lucky.
And that card did not say please.
Don't have that lucky thing. Just create the custom. And I kind of wanted that. I kind of needed that encouragement when I was at that stage.
Which kind of brings to the point too, having a thematic cube and a restriction does make spoiler seasons differently exciting for people like us because we're not looking at the power elevated cards. We're not looking for power max. We're not min-maxing and going, this card makes it into my powered vintage cube. I'm doing something completely different. I'm like, oh my God, they made a blood artist. It is a woman. what? Get in here. Because
I love that blood artist.
Oh, it's gorgeous. It's
She's my
gorgeous. Or yeah, I mean, so I have different. I'm going through spoiler season. It's so funny. As a group, we've got a whole bunch of curators in our group, and you being part of the group as well. It's comedy on spoiler season because we're all in our tight little group. We've got this text chain, and you should see it blowing up because none of it makes any sense. I'm like, oh my god, they got a blood artist, and everybody's like, I don't care. Blood artist has been out forever. And then the other people's like, look at this for my peasant cube, and I'm like, I don't care. I don't have a peasant cube. It is, it's all over the place. Like, oh my god, and everybody's going nuts, and none of it makes any sense because we all have thematic cubes and different power levels, and it's all over the.
It's nice to be excited about a set that's come out, right? Because we've talked a bit about. There's so many products that have been released recently, and it's easy to kind of get saturated with them and feel like they're maybe not quite as special as they used to be. Question mark.
Yeah.
But it can be something like you're not just looking to like min-max your commander deck or your vintage cube or something like that. Sometimes, like you say, you're just excited because of a new art.
Yeah, reprint. Because I've got a metal cube that we're going to talk about in a future episode. We're going to talk about the Femme Cube in a future episode. And my metal cube in this case, everything's based on. It's like an album cover. It's a 180. We listen, like we said, we listen to Gojira. We listen to Metallica, Meshuggah, and we just sit around and drink some whiskey and play some cards. But the whole thematic design is these cards have to inspire you to kind of, you know what I mean, like your throat singing, right? That's that design concept. 40,000 feet in the air. I wanted to do Eddie Munson, great character from Stranger Things.
This is not to say that we're telling you if you're playing a cube like that you need to, paint the walls with blood hang bats from the ceiling.
Don't bite any bat.
Like really get
don't bite any heads off a bat. Yeah,
if you've got some art pieces that you can maybe hang up, in a
you can see though. You can see a black. I'm okay with a black light. Set the mood. Play some metal. Which kind of let's talk about more things that round out your thematic concept. We went over brainstorming, come up with the idea, and then you figure out the cube size. You look at your card pool. You paper, rock, scissors.
I actually wanted to add a little bit more for the cards to be excited for spoiler season.
Do it. You can add
I actually did find, surprisingly, from a March of the Machines, the Mom set.
Oh, yeah.
I was very surprised because I haven't had any good Fae Cube cards for long while.
It's good.
And when March of the Machines started getting spoiled, I saw a particular card, Halo Forager, that happened to have really good flavor, has really good art. And I'm like, this is a fairy rogue lower power Snapcaster. I need this for my cube yesterday.
And Peasant Cube.
Having those moments is an absolute adrenaline rush when it comes to your thematic cubes because you see that one card in the pack that everybody's like, okay, cool, great, I guess. And then you're just like, I need this for my cube.
Oh, and foil,
this is the card I needed.
The best.
That card is sick, and I'll have to dig that one up and add it to the show notes. But that card in particular, and I don't have it in front of me. Actually, can you pull that one up real quick and read that one to the audience because this one's relevant because this is actually for peasant players too. This card is Snapcaster at home this is a fantastic card that may have gotten overlooked.
Halo Forager is one colorless blue-black for a 3/1 flying fairy rogue creature. When it enters the battlefield, you may pay X. When you do, you may cast target instant or sorcery card with mana value X from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If this spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead.
Yeah.
Yes, it does not have flash.
Who cares?
Yes, it still requires you to pay up front with the X cost.
And it's a flyer.
It's still an uncommon 3/1 flyer for 3 at its floor.
3/1 flyer
and then you can pay X additional to just play whatever from your graveyard, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
What a good design for a card.
But what's so interesting, going back to that thematic concept. So you take two players. Chris Moore has a Peasant Cube, and he's like, oh my gosh, this card's awesome. You got May going, oh my gosh, this card is awesome. They're not saying it for the same reason, but they are, but they aren't. You know what I mean? Like, she's like, it's a fairy. And he's like, it's uncommon. And that's what's so neat about having thematic cube designs and the type of emotions it invokes during spoiler season, because we're shouting at the clouds for different reasons. It's so interesting.
I feel like we're selling spoiler season just as much as we're selling
it
thematic
is. It's
cube
part
right
of the.
now.
It's part of the.
Because I know a lot of people who, like I said, being a little bit turned off. They're not quite as excited for the spoiler season that they used to be. This is how, if you're missing that spoiler season excitement,
Yeah.
And now's your chance
If you're
to
sick
get
of
back.
just changing this card out because it went up an efficiency rating of -1, you're like, I guess I'll swap it out. Sure, I can see your feelings. But if you're like,
Yes,
if you're
this
like
Canker
us, then
Bloom,
you're
which
like,
will
oh
slightly
my
replace
god,
my
this
Toxic
is metal as
Caterpillar. I'm
AF. Or,
excited.
oh my god, this is a Fae. Or oh my god, this is a woman. I'm like, we have a completely different experience during spoiler season. Like, I can't wait to get a Faithless Looting with a female on it. Or, it's completely different. It's a different way of thinking. But what's kind of to push along that, just because Faithless Looting doesn't have said female on it, doesn't mean I have to restrict myself from a good card. I can make choices to bend the rules because it is your cube, your experience. You tell the story how you wish. I just think with thematic cubes, as long as you have a majority or a high enough quantity of fixtures within said environment that represents the story elements, that a person, represents the book or the movie or whatever you're trying to portray here, right? That it gets the point across good enough. If you had to do some outliers and like thought scour just because it didn't have at the time the Fae or the Fairy on it, you could have done it, but I understand your logic that you wanted to wait until it had it. It would have made it feel better to you, but could you have used it?
No, it was more of I didn't conceptualize. I could just alter it. I could just customize it.
True.
It wasn't a thought that was occurring to me at the time. It was, man, this is a card I'd really like to run, but I can't. What a tragedy. I guess that's that.
So
It would have been nice to have somebody be like, just run the custom card on your forehead. Just put it in the cube.
Do it.
You're not going to
Get
jail.
like a Sharpie and just draw over
I had
it.
a similar
Congratulations.
experience. Yeah, I had a similar experience in my horror cube, and I've since moved past it. I was still, at the time, it was in its infantile stages of development, and it was very factional based, and it wasn't as good as it is. It's good now. It's CubeCon ready. But then I had kind of a really bad mana base at the time. They just didn't have the mana that were on theme printed for it, and I was really getting torn as a builder. I wanted to put stuff from Innistrad in it, and it was clunky, is what I'm trying to say. So my good friend David, who's on an episode coming up soon, he said, well, why don't you just make custom AB duels, custom fetches, and it just like a storm went off my head, and I just started searching the internet, and I did, in fact, through nefarious ways, make said proxies, the local printing company kind of thing. But then I also did my own custom art on them. It didn't come out as good as I wanted to. I'm not gonna lie to you. The printing company didn't do it, and that's gone now. But I did get to do like flavor text that was really scary, like Edgar Allan Poe from The Raven or The House of Usher, or I did something from Cthulhu, Lovecraft. I even did some Clive Barker, Hellbound Heart. And then I would also write my own quotes on it. So part of the storytelling of a thematic cube is also making the game pieces and elements immerse your players. You want when they sit down not to go, oh, this is just an Innistrad cube. No. I want you to feel like this is a really scary universe. And what can I do to bring pieces in that every time you open a car up, doesn't look like something pleasant? That's what I mean. In so many words, right? And you do the same with the Fae Cube and other cubes. One way that we can go about doing it, aside from playing soundtracks of metal music or Gwen Stefani with my, I do these things, right? On opening night. Yep. But to me, it is really important, very important, that your basic lands represent your story. This is me personally. So in this case, like my artifact cube, and I do actually want to change these, but they were affordable. Like I use Kaladesh lands to represent that because it was a artifact centric set, and I thought those lands were really beautiful. Would I have rather had Mirrodin? Yes, but they're expensive. I'm not gonna lie to you. But then in the case of the Femme Fatale, I'm actually using Lorwyn lands, and I'm not quite sure what these are called, and they'll be in the show notes. But whenever I pass these out, and I'll pass them out tomorrow, people ooh and ah at the swamps and these islands from Lorwyn. I think they call them the cotton candies. Not certain, but they're absolutely gorgeous and took me a long time to acquire these little puffy flowers.
I will say, I think overall, I don't know what it is, but the swamp and island arts have always stood out for me. Over all the other, over mountains, over plains, over forests. I don't know what it is, but I've always felt that the swamps and the islands have always kind of got the lion's share of the good art. And Lorwyn is no exception. The swamp and island arts are absolutely sensational.
And they're part of my story elements, right? Matter of fact, can you see those, May, those in your show notes? Check out these Lorwyn lands. These should be in your Fae Cube. Check these out. You're going to like some.
Aha. Well, you see, there's a funny story when it comes to the Lorwyn lands in my Fae Cube.
Do it.
And the short answer is, majority of the people just aren't buying a pile of the same lands of a particular like plane or whatever. They're just buying bulk and then filling it up. And my collection of Lorwyn lands is a bit more scattered.
Sure.
Every time that I see my friends' collections or whatever, I'll be like, hey, do you have any Lorwyn lands?
Yeah.
And I literally just grab all of their lands and like trade them out with my basics or whatever. And I slowly start collecting all the basic lands instead of just going on ordering like 40 of each.
Which brings us to another interesting story element. So you have lands that represent Lorwyn-esque for your entire Fae Cube universe, right? Me, part of it is I want lands that look similar just because I think it's cleaner in your hand, but I understand, which brings up a good point. In my horror cube, my horror cube actually have the I don't know what they call them. It's basically like the Dark Ascension versus the Avacyn Restored, where everything was dark and gloomy, and suddenly they turned the lights on and everything was happy. In one case, you might have a tree in a forest that looks ominous, and then you flip on the lights, and suddenly there's a fawn underneath it, grazing in the next art. But I intentionally seeded those in there, so as you're playing with my basics, it'll have the same tree. But if you look at it really, or the same graveyard, you might see some blood in one picture because there's enough light to see the blood. The next one, it looks really bad, and you probably should have left by now because it's about to change. Yeah. So, and I was, to make it funny, part of my thematic story element design concept in my brain was, even with I was talking about the flavor text, and unfortunately it's not going to be featured at KubeCon with the flavor text because of the proxy rule, is I wrote it so that the sun came up and things were normalized. And then I start writing Dusk Till Dawn kind of elements, even in my card selections, that by the time the sun starts setting, you really should have locked the doors and barred the windows. Vice versa. You get where I'm going. I wanted to make my story so maybe granted, Stu doesn't see that as a drafter, right? But that's me as the visionary during my brainstorm is I want this to be daytime is okay. You should go get some apples really quick. But if you haven't left that orchard by by the time the sun starts looming, you better run really fast. That's how I built this game.
I don't know. I would say that it's definitely... I think it depends on, for me, how comfortable I am with the draft, right? If it's something I'm new, if it's a cube I'm very, very new to, I'm probably going to focus pretty hard on, right, what are the signposts, the card types, all that kind of stuff. I'm kind of going to look for a lane. I generally consider myself to be, I want to try and draft well, especially if it's the first time, right? But I think the more comfortable I get with the cube, then I think the more relaxed I'm going to get. And the more that I think I want to not just use it as a play experience, but I am sort of getting more interested in sort of the creation of the cube from the designer's perspective.
That actually makes sense.
Maybe for the first couple of times, 3-4 times, maybe I'm just more focused on the cards. But I think after that, I'm really looking at the thing. But I think you can sort of solve some of those issues with, right, first night, you're drafting a cube. You've never drafted it before. You got all your friends around. You're sitting around the table, right? For me, if I'm doing the horror cube, for example, I'm getting everyone sat around the table. Then I'm turning the lights off, and then I've got Hellraiser in the background, and then I've got the scary music and all that kind of stuff. Like,
which we've
I want
done.
to introduce something fun like that, right? And then we can sit down and start draft. So that's how you can sort of bring the vibe of the cube. And then, like I say, later on, you can sort of get more with the
We
flavor.
draft it for our good friend's Nathan's birthday that happens to coincide with Halloween every year. So we do a horror cube draft and have a good time with it. Another example of the lands, because lands really matter to the storytelling elements, like is my two-headed giant cube is battle bond centric. And they just so happen to have, from their lands that were printed in Battle Bond, is their arenas. And that's what, and I even do stuff like Colosseums, and I'm looking for cards that represent you're trapped inside of this, like gladiator fight, right? Even though it's two mages versus two mages trying to, they're spell casting and trying to kill each other in the game. I get that two-headed giant concept. I want them to be within an arena with shouting spectators. Battle Bond really painted that picture, but I have, I guess, massaged that idea. I've made it even bigger, into a huge one-time major feature. If you don't show up, you've missed the battle of the century inside of this gladiatorial event. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I
think gladiatorial is a great word for it.
That's what I want you to enjoy.
And that's what it feels like, right? You're sitting down, you're going about... I've never played Pokemon, but I can imagine that's kind of, you're battling against people that's similar to you are, to the way that you're playing one-on-one when you're playing Magic, or when you're playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Or any other game where you're going like head-to-head, except now you've got someone playing with you, and that kind of changes the dynamic. So that kind of, more arena-y, multiplayer-y kind of feel, like, it's...
And you can tell by the excitement level of his voice, it's part of the immersion experience.
I love that cube.
Of a thematic build set that you and I do, right? Yeah. And that's part of the pillars that you want in your story elements, is to have your players excited to feel your world you've developed. What are your thoughts on that, May?
It is definitely an external element that can convey the themes and ideas and the texture of your cube in a very organic way. It is a piece that people are going to subconsciously realize is there and piece together as parts of their decks. And when they're deck building or whatever, its lands are going to be a good way to convey your thematic presence. Like, I'm not going to throw in a bunch of, let me make an absurd example, Phyrexian lands into my Fae Cube just because I'm short a couple lands. I'll throw in some Eldraine lands. I'll throw in M11 lands. Because when I first made the cube, I had, 40 of each of the M11 lands. So I was able to just shove those in because I had those as extra. But now over time, as I've started introducing all those Lorwyn lands, now it's starting to get a little bit more of that personal identity with those lands, and now it's easier to build that as an external piece to that. And like Stu said, with adding that additional vibe or content by, say, dimming the lights and playing the appropriate music and whatever, and making an experience playing your cube.
Yeah. Yes, my heart cube's actually in a grimoire.
Great way to add texture to the experience.
My heart cube's in a grimoire, which I actually need to buy it because that thing's beat to death at this point. I need to get a new one. But they're Wizards.
Is it Geth's grimoire?
Yeah, it's nice. Wizards Foundry, I believe, is the name of the company, and they make it's a beautifully bound grimoire, and they have all these different. They have much better designs. I think I have like literally Gen 1, and the thing is, you'll see it tomorrow. It's lost its hinges and pieces. But when I first got it, it's very ornate, and I do recommend looking at that. For matter of fact, even for the concept of the Fae Cube down the road, they look like spell books. They're really beautiful. They stand upright. But when I take it to conventions like SEG Con in Charlotte, and we're going to the one by the time this show's come out, Richmond, people are amazed when I open this up and it's inside of this neat looking spellbook grimoire, and it's just it's part of the experience. Granted, I'm in a giant hall, right, and I can't do the mood lighting and setting and have Hellraiser in the background, except Monster Mash or whatever Stu's requesting, because he's the only one requesting this weird stuff. But I can still set the tone and the environment for the play lines, right?
If I could,
yes,
I would totally just have one of those like false books and just have the Fae Cube inside of a false book, and then just bring like this book, put it on the table, open it up, and like start dealing out the packs from the Fae Cube. And it's literally like I'm presenting like pieces of the stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be cool and thematic. For now, I have Quiver, which is a fantastic product, and I'm happy to use them. Not sponsored, just saying they're good.
Yeah, so you can see where there's so many elements to the idea of thematic cube design. It's not the brainstorming part. It's the deciding what type of story or painting you wish to paint as said curator. Then you also want to develop and fine-tune archetypes, or find a way to define how you want players to interpret your story elements. And then, as you like to talk about, pillars within your environment. What represents your ceilings and your floors? Are your dragons going to be the Shivan dragon level, or are they going to be much higher, like a flame blast dragon?
Old Gnawbones.
Yeah, exactly. Old Gnawbones, right? So you decide and paint this picture and decide if this card meets your story-driven, is it Brothers Grimm, or have I inadvertently overstepped into Anthony's horror cube by picking a card art element that didn't match? Or do we get so lucky during spoiler season and get a blood artist that's now female that can complete a piece without having to make a proxy that was holding it, or Thassa's Oracle? It's just a whole different type of way of looking at cube design that I find fascinating. We only rails you and I are on are the ones that we make for ourselves. What are your thoughts?
Speaking of rails, I'm actually going to take our script off the rails for a
Do
second.
it. Go for it. 100%.
Because speaking of building into these custom cards and whatever, I actually wanted to take a footnote completely off script of what happens when you have a cube, but you're trying to introduce a flavor element into it. And I am curious what your kind of approach is, because I've answered this question on Twitter, and it's something that I've been brewing in my mind and thinking about. Of somebody has a cube, and they're trying to introduce a theme, and what are your kind of general suggestions? How would you approach such a problem?
So this is a pre-existing cube someone has, and they're looking to try and build in a new sub-theme within that cube. Is that the question?
Can I give a real-world example of what I'm dealing with right now?
More of adding a flavor into that cube.
Yeah, I want
making it identifiable by its kind of
aside
feeling.
from like my horror cube easily getting set as an analog to an Innistrad cube, because a lot of times people say Innistrad set cube. That's not what I want at all. Let's start there. I want it to be a horrific place that you don't want to visit, but it's not just an Innistrad. Those cards just happen to align from that plane more often than not. But, like, if I want to, in this case, have a self-mill strategy, which I don't do mill, I do self-mill. How do I make the cube go outside of just vampires versus werewolves versus spirit? I don't want it to be a creature turned sideways environment. I want layers is one of the things I've really been thinking about. Like, how do I make it for a player who had just learned Magic yesterday to play that cube? They want to turn sideways, maybe. I want to do green stompy. And then how do I appease the spikes of the universe, right? The ones that want to play the highest tiers of Magic even, or they want to just crush the game outside of self-mill. So I talked about Hogak earlier. I'm looking for more rewards that go outside a little bit. It's scary enough, but it also does the delve, and it does the convoke effects that will entice players to try to do the self-mill with an interesting payoff outside of spider spawning, which is great, and outside of Labman, and outside of Jace Wildermill, and Thassa's Oracle was too good. It was winning games more regular than not. It was too fast because 40-card deck. But I wanted to make self-mill have not just I'm milling to get to the bottom of my library to make it last card, but how do I get some creature rewards, like spider spawning, for example. But Hogak, which I got to find tonight.
And I will say...
It gives a different level. But let me add one more piece.
Go ahead.
Chris and I were talking, my buddy Chris and I, Sandwich, were talking about yesterday, well, what if I added anger to the cube? Because I was thinking I should do that. He said no, and he's right. Because then anger becomes a real problem in that graveyard. Now that your acidic slimes and these things that have to deal with the graveyard abuses now get turned off to get rid of anger. Anger will give an advantage to one graveyard. It's going to be really hard.
I don't think you can just slap that in.
I can't.
Absolutely not.
Because it's too good.
It's far too good.
But it crossed my mind for a moment that what if I had Hogak and anger? You see him go, it would be badass. But the problem is I went too far. I'm going to do Hogak. I'm going to treat him as a Baneslayer angel, enters the battlefield. You got a Hogak. Congratulations.
Still got to turn it sideways.
Opposed to anger, kill you with Hogak.
Yeah.
So it was a design philosophy that maybe I started going down the rabbit hole, and I got tased by Chris. He's like, no, anger too much. I'm like, well, what about Wonder and Glory? Stop.
Stop trying to force combat on the turn.
Yank on your leash a little bit.
Because I'm expanding. You had to get tugged on because I'm expanding my
sidewalk.
Because he's like, remember you have a universe, right? And I'm like, but what if I go over to the neighbor's universe?
As I will say, right, as a player though, Chris has that in his Sultai cube. He has Hogak. And when we drafted that the last time we hung out, I saw that. I think it was in the first pack that I opened. And I was like, right, I want to draft Hogak. I don't care what I have to do to try and make this work. I'm going to try and make it work. I think I only went, I don't even know how many games I won with it. It wasn't many. But that fulfills everything. It's a signpost. It's an archetype. It's like so many. It's a proper standard bearer for me, right? Because it represents so much.
Now I've got to find it. Now that I've made him excited. I can't find it.
I want Hogak in every cube.
It's a fun card. So but that thematic threshold, but it's also not quite Innistrad. That's my point. You see, I'm the world builder, as you are with the Fae Cube. You're bringing cards outside the elements. So the restriction only comes from you being the painter. I'm going to keep saying that throughout this episode. All right, so let's kind of move over.
I just wanted to add a little footnote, if that's okay.
No, you go ahead and do it.
If you want to take the approach of, if you have a cube that you're trying to make a little bit more unique, or have a little bit more spice, or a little bit more independent flavor, or whatever, you don't have to have some specific planar theme or some specific thing already pre-planned from it. You can work with the things that you already have, either by, again, proxying, altering, or I like the third approach of taking some of the themes that you have and then making them literal. So, again, aristocrats into nobles, and making that a visual theme into the flavor of your cube to make it stand out a little bit more amongst your playgroup.
Yes.
Taking your peasant cube and saying, all right, what's within peasant that fits within a particular vibe?
Yeah. Like in the case of that chess idea, the Micaeuses, the dark and night, the dark and white cleric kind of idea, they fit those concepts of bishops. That's how you do the stretchy, right? So clerics equals bishop. Knight's always knight, but sometimes you gotta get a little stretchy in the stretchy pants, right? To make some of these themes work. But once your players acknowledge it and understand it, it'll make sense. So that's kind of the limitation you have, is whatever limitations you put on yourself. And then I think it's a good idea, like we talked about, is to explain to your players the vision you're trying to get. And once they get it, they got it, right? It'll stick. You know what you're trying to do. So to kind of close this off, when you're building a thematic cube, you brainstorm the theme, right? And it doesn't matter. I don't care what it is. You want to do something like representing Daddy Warbucks and the United States dollar, or maybe you want to do Wizard of Oz, or maybe you want to do something crazy like Falcons versus Seagulls, like we talked about. You can go as nutty as you want.
I have the brainworm of Skyrim cube.
Do it, right? Right? I know. I've got a chess cube. I got a Monopoly cube. I've got a horror cube. I got a Femme Cube. You got a Fae Cube. She's building some kind of weird monetary cube. Stu's got a Doom Cube that we'll never see and we're not supposed to talk about. But
I'll cover that. We'll talk about that in maybe one of our
2026. We're gonna go Doom Cube. It's gonna be sick, Doom Cube. But you're only restricted by the elements that you've chosen. You find the pieces that fit what you want to do. You don't have to do a square peg round hole, but you can make it work. Brainstorm the idea. Choose your cube size. 180, 450, I don't care, 720. My preference, though, if I had to pick one, for me, is 360. 360, I think, is a nice developmental, it's a good way to build strong archetypes. Like if you want to represent them and have a theme, it's just worked for me personally, because it's a small enough card pool, but it can actually do 8 drafters, etc. When we do our drafting tomorrow, all of my cubes, the majority of them that I'm taking that are thematic, artifact, and the horror cube and my Femme Cube are all 360. And whenever I deal them all out, every cube in the entire pool is out there, good to go. I
think it's a consideration as well, like very quickly, as far as the numbers are concerned. If you can be fairly confident that you can get 8 players together to draft on a regular basis, then absolutely, you've got a little bit more freedom when it comes to the numbers. If you think you might struggle to maybe get 4 players together, then maybe stick to a 180 or maybe a 360. But if you're fortunate enough to have, like I say, 8, 12, even 16 players, then get your 540 and your 720 on.
Those numbers are just recommendations. They're not even real. You can do whatever you want. I got 480, I think, is what I got for my 2-headed giant cube. Just
4 cards.
I just wanted it to feel a little different. The next thing is kind of you do your archetype decisions in your thematic realm. Like you want to decide, do I want to support aristocrats? Do I want to do some kind of self-mill? Or I want to do, sprites and fairies matters and their counter magic suite. You have these options as a curator, and they can also fit within your thematic process. I recommend, before spending a dime, theory crafting it digitally using something like Cube Cobra. Lay it out on paper. That's why the chess cube and the Monopoly cube, and it sounds like May's got a brain like me, where she's probably built cubes too. It's probably financially smart to digitally represent these and then ask your friends, is this work? Because that's what I'm doing, right? Like I'm massaging the idea of the chess cube. I want to represent it en passant. I haven't even, once it's developed, I'll do an episode on it, but I just want to see, before I spend money, if this cube would even be fun. And I think if I do it digitally, I can save myself a lot. It's just mostly an afternoon of me just typing these cards out. Like I said, the Micaeus, right? It's financially sound, and then my friends can draft it. That saves you the money. I'd say include your play group and your community in your design process. May and I, we don't bounce back as forth as much as we should, but we do within the Discord. You'll have players ask about certain cards, and May will say this works within her environments, etc. And then, it's mostly her because I'm on an airplane. But
Hi.
and then other than that, the most important thing, and this is most important to a thematic build, shuffle it up, draft it out, and just have some fun. Have fun.
We're not going to replace Happy
Don't
Cube.
be afraid of the what could be's or the what could go wrongs. Just do it.
Exactly.
Just do it. And play it.
Just do it.
Yes, you want to build an entire cube based on
No
the
more
shoelaces and they're wearing Nikes. I don't know.
Ladies looking
Take
left
your
at you.
dinosaur.
Yep, do it.
Just shove in all the dinosaur cards. If the card doesn't work, take it back out.
Just have
Jurassic
fun.
Park
Super Mario
BB.
Cube, go for it. Go nuts. All right, so Stu, we're going to move over to the socials. And I before we even do that, I just want to, again, thank our host, May. Thank our host Stu for showing up and actually providing the computer. And
you're welcome.
Let's get out of here.
All right. So as always, if you enjoy this episode as well as any of our other episodes, we would really appreciate a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform. Really helps to get us out there. We want to be exposed more and more to the Magic community, the Cube community, get this wonderful format out there to as many people as possible. So we'd really appreciate that. If you also want to support the show directly, you can use our Inked Gaming affiliate link for some wonderful designs for playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, a whole load of products that they have. Amazing designs, really, really high quality stuff that those guys have. So if you're looking for something to bling out your night of Magic, whatever your format might be, then please go check them out, and you can see our Inked Gaming affiliate link on our Twitter, which you can find at UberCubeMTGPod. If you want to get in with the discussion, talk about Cube, talk about this episode, a previous episode, send us complaints or compliments or questions, then feel free to stop by anytime.
Yeah, if you got complaints, send it to @Stu.
Actually, if you've got a complaint, please write it down on a 12-year-old single malt bottle of Glenfiddich.
Yes, and put a stamp on it, 25 cents.
And I'll give you a PO box.
There we go. It's nice PO box.
Or you can even...
This is weak sauce. I want to have my complaints shipped on me by carrier pigeon. I want you to write it down.
I want a raven. Carrier pigeons are weak.
Strap it on their leg and send it to my house.
I want a
Say
raven.
it to my face or by written communication.
Engrave it on a Rolex and stick it on that pigeon and send it my way. Or if you're not carrier pigeons sending Rolexes, you can reach us via email. We are UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. As always, you can check out our Discord. We got links on the Twitters. And finally, Anthony, tell us about the Patreon. That's great, Anthony. Thank you for great news. Thanks about the Patreon. So, as we do always here,
We're going to do one more thing. We're going to do a shout out before we do the thing that we always do here, is I want to do a special thanks to a couple of groups. So, I want to give a shout out to Slick Jagger. You can find him on Twitter, and he's got a product out there called Cubeheads. It's pretty cool, and it's youtube.com/@Cubeheads. I've got some sick swag. Got some really cool swag from him recently. The products are gorgeous, and whenever UberCube is very much encroaching, and it will very shortly hit post 10,000 downloads in under a year, which is yay.
That's pretty sweet.
We will be using these really cool Cubeheads products during our party, which will be an all-day festivity.
It will.
In my backyard. My wife has approved this with enough sunblock and cover so that I don't burn in the sunshine while I grill, but we're going to cube all day, and I just wanted to give a shout out to @Cubeheads. You can find Slick Jagger, check it out. And also, UberCube is going to be at CubeCon, Madison, Wisconsin, and we are really trying to entice May to join us.
She's coming.
We are working this idea. We're going to make it happen, but we are excited, and it is important. And by the time we have released this episode, they will be looking for for cube submissions.
That's right.
For the featureds. So everybody get your cubes out there. You can find, they have a Discord for Cube. We'll leave it in the show notes for CubeCon, etc. And we are super hype about it.
Yeah.
And it starts Monday, the 17th.
It's the pinnacle of the Cube calendar, without any doubt. Last year's event, which was the maiden event, was absolutely spectacular. Ton of people, everyone hanging out, great community event, tons and tons of different cubes. Not just sort of the more organized cube event where it was very competitive, if that's your jam, but a whole bunch of just free play and everybody coming around and hanging out, doing some cube drafting and then eating some barbecue or whatever your flavor might be. But cannot recommend it enough. If you're a fan of cube, or even if you're just a fan of Magic and you want to really get more into cube, maybe you don't have a play group to play with, or you just want to showcase your own cube or whatever the case may be, you don't even have to submit it officially. Just bring it out. Come hang out with us and the rest of the CubeCon guys. Jonathan Brostaff, John Terrell,
Dustin
Parnell, Derek,
Gwen Decker.
I know I'm terrible from
Andy Mangold,
Andy
Nucky
Mangold,
Paper Radio.
Nucky Paper, yeah. All the celebrities in the cube world.
Derek. He just likes to say Derek.
Everyone out there, they're all fantastic.
May.
All fantastic, and it's a great event, and we would love to see you guys out there. So, with that being said, we're going to do and say what we always do at the end of the episode here at UberCube.
Make me a sandwich. Happy
No, I
cubing!
don't think that's how it goes. I think it goes happy
cubing. Happy cube. Something. Bye. Make me a sandwich.